And I think it becomes very difficult when people try to have honest discussions about AEW, because to paint everything as rosy and positive and just lean on this new television deal they have signed, I think you are burying your head in the sand to a lot of empirical evidence, many of which comes from Brandon Thurston, that you can observe very objectively and see where things are. We're not going back to 2019. We're looking at 6 months ago. We're looking from 12 months ago. Where things have gone, where its popularity is, and you can address those issues, and everyone can come up with their theories on what they would change, what would be different. But there's absolutely problems that are there that you could ignore or you can address. But it just becomes such a volatile issue, and especially when it comes from an Eric Bischoff, it's going to be met with detractors and those that completely kneel at the thoughts that are espoused by an Eric Bischoff, and you get a totally muddled view of where things are.
Yeah, I disagree with Eric's diagnosis of what the issue is. The issue is not the lack of story. Maybe it's a lack of good story or good compelling TV, whatever that is. It's not. I don't view AEW content as he does, and I agree with what you just said, which we discussed a bit off air, that it's impossible to have, as you wrote once, a civil conversation about AEW's business. Because you get lumped in with people who are perceived as grifters, and people are perceived as just working the algorithm to get the most attention on all of their AEW, on all of their negative AEW content, which really does well. I mean, the times where we've like cut up clips of us talking about AEW business, especially when AEW business has been down, which has been the case for the last couple of years, it does more views. I've noticed, at least on my channel, than other run of the mill stuff does. So all of that algorithmic nonsense makes it really hard to have a civil conversation, because you have people in the comments who are accusing you of being, bought WWE media when we're talking about stuff like this, because we will have real criticisms for AEW. So all that being said, let's set the table.
It's good for Brandon and I, because I think all companies dislike us. So we're good. We're good.
So TV ratings are down. They're down by 18%. If you just look at the demo, it's down by 19%. Attendance is down, whether it's Dynamite or Collision. Their market-to-market comparisons when it comes to live events are strongly down. There's real empirical stuff there. I won't go through it in audio, but there's clearly a downturn in their business at this time, at this exact moment, that in just last October, they made a TV deal that will probably make them viable, that will probably make them profitable, which is so counterintuitive to the direction of their company, and sort of what we talked about earlier in terms of this business being transformed over the last few decades from being a live event business that was immediate feedback in terms of the ticket sales that you got, to being this sort of 3, 4, 5 year delay in terms of the TV deals that you get. And oh, by the way, it doesn't really necessarily matter what your TV ratings are on their face. What really matters is this image that I'll show in video, is where you rank among TV generally. And what I've got here is your weekly averaged out over time. I've got it broken down by year quarter. Suffice to say, Dynamite still ranks pretty strongly. Now, are we seeing some weakening? I would look at this and argue that we are seeing some weakening here, in that if you look at each year, averaged by the quarter, we usually see Q1 start off fairly weak, or what we see actually is, say, look in this late 2022 period, where their ranking starts off lower, and then it sort of peaks up into Q3. And we sort of see a similar pattern here in each of those 3 prior years, from 2023 and backwards. And what we're seeing here is not that. We are seeing it bottom out here in Q4, but we do not see this upshoot from Q4 of last year into this year. Is it ranking poorly enough that David Zaslav and Kathleen Finch and Channing Dungey are freaking out in WBD headquarters? Probably not. But if we're looking at this fairly, aside from the times where they're praising each other in public, are they having some concerns about AEW's popularity? I think they should be having some concerns about AEW's popularity. And I will agree with Eric Bischoff about this, and that I don't really have any hope as far as it turning their popularity around. Not in terms of whether or not they're going to survive as a business, but in terms of turning their popularity around to get back to the level of a year ago or 2 years ago. I don't really have any hope that that's going to happen, as long as what we all assume is going to happen is that as long as the head booker, Tony Khan, is still the head booker, this is clearly a product that needs to change who its head coach is. It doesn't necessarily need to change who the president of the company is and who's driving the business and who's making the TV deals. Tony Khan succeeded greatly by renewing their TV deals at a great increase of what it was, of what their incumbent deal was. And that's going to make this company financially viable in all likelihood, maybe by next year. But clearly the content has some problems here, and it needs somebody else as the head coach. And everybody presumes that Tony Khan is just, well, we can't even discuss it. It's off the table to discuss that the owner of this company, who's also the head booker, is ever going to relinquish that power. And I think that's a conversation we should have more and say, well, why not? You've got the opportunity here to have a stronger legacy in terms of I think we're now in sort of a Vince McMahon situation in that, well, the owner, the guy with all the power is the head of creative, and there's just no discussing delegating that or stepping aside of that particular. That's just one of his jobs within AEW. There's just no conversation to be had about that, of putting somebody else in that role.
I was looking at this week's number. This was the Thanksgiving Eve number, and I know that there are plenty of factors that you can look at.
The West Coast feed. Oh my God.
You can throw at all of this, but I mean, Brandon, you just recently crunched the numbers, going carrier by carrier of how much cable is down. And we can throw in the West Coast airing live last Wednesday night. The number I focused on, looking at last year's Thanksgiving Eve show, was the 18 to 34 number, which this year was down 55% from last week. And I don't care the worst prognostication you want to put on where cable has fallen or West Coast viewers not being able to tune in or the lack of promotion for it. I put a lot of emphasis on the 18 to 34 number because I think that dictates a lot of a company's momentum and what is being focused upon. And yes, this is probably not indicative of a typical week's drop year over year in that demo, but it summarizes or confirms, I think, a lot of people's thoughts towards the trend of the product. And to me, that was a very alarming number. And you're starting to have a lot of the same discussion about the on-screen product that is it the players that are on the field? Because I don't know how many rosters have had this level of talent and experience. This is a loaded roster. Are they being utilized to the best of their ability? Which are arguments we had about WWE in 2019 and had with TNA in 2009. And often it is looked upon as a creative direction and a philosophy that engulfs the show that the viewer is getting. And this was a product that was very much in the wrestling zeitgeist and connected to that pulse in 2019. And I would say through to 2022. And today in 2024, it does not feel like it is on that same pulse. But what they have going for them is this television deal and the fact that Dynamite especially has held up in the rankings. And you can have these discussions to venture out and use a football analogy, which correct me if I am wrong, but this year the Bills are 10-2 and they are in first place. Next year, they could be in a much weaker division. And if they are in the same boat, they are 8-4, they could still be in first place, but still be a weaker team than they were the year before. These things can be true. Your competition could be less next year, and your ranking will subside.
Yeah. Midway through last year's Bills season, I think Sean McDermott was not feeling safe. I remember having the discussion, well, if he doesn't win at least one playoff game, maybe he's out of a job. He's still a coach, though, because they did win at least one playoff game. I think now the thing that people will raise is, but isn't Tony still the best one to be the head of creative for AEW? And is there anyone else that you could see being the head of creative for AEW? And the first person who comes to mind for me as an alternative would be Bryan Danielson. But there's other strong wrestling minds in that company too. I think Chris Hero is still an agent, producer, whatever their term is for producers in AEW. And again, I would look back to nobody knew who Tony Khan was until 2019, and yet he turned out to be a very good booker for several years. And I think that time has come to an end.
That should be a lesson. That should be a lesson that this incredible barrier to entry to book national television, should it be as high as we sometimes make it out to be, because such a small, it's been for a generation, just a musical chairs of the same figures that have occupied these positions in national wrestling companies when it comes to booking / writing.
Yes. So I think there are alternatives that are reasonable to think about, but I think it's off the table for wrestling conversation. Perhaps it's off the table internally in AEW because we all just assume that that's not a delegation option that Tony Khan is willing to consider. And I think if that's the case, which probably is, I think we should consider why. Then you're putting ego first before business, and you're playing right into the stereotypes and, in fact, the criticisms that CM Punk raised in a different interview with Ariel Helwani. That this isn't a business, and I think what he meant by that is that business goals are not being prioritized like they should be, ahead of other things like perhaps talent relationships, perhaps indulging in being the head booker of a wrestling company.
Do you feel that this is something that when an Eric Bischoff says, like, there is no hope of turning this around, let's give the benefit of the doubt that he is stating that in a way that it's not literally impossible to turn this around, but that a Tony Khan is not going to give up this role, that he is too tied to this role of being the creative visionary, that this is ultimately, I mean, this is going to be Tony Khan's company, much like it was Vince McMahon's company that took basically an act of God that no one foresaw that would remove him from power. Like there was
a scandal to remove him and to actually improve their business and inversely hurt AEW's business.
And in another period, probably would have survived a scandal. Like if this was a private company, none of this is getting reported on by the Wall Street Journal. This would have just been something that probably the public would have not known anything about. Like this was at its core. This was a story about money that drove the Wall Street Journal to report on. But that's getting away from things. The idea that we can have all these discussions about alternative creative ideas, but at the end of the day, is the owner of this company going to remove himself from that position? And what would put him into a position to make that move?
Who's going to be the Nancy Pelosi to his Joe Biden? Who's going to have the sit down and say, look, you know, you've been a great president of AEW. You've done things that nobody could have done, and you're going to be remembered as one of the great leaders in all of history. But the thing that will make you an even greater figure of history is to step aside at this crucial moment and let whomever, if it's the Kamala Harris role here, then run for election and then lose, actually. So.
This might not work out so well. No pardons being handed down either. But I guess it is a discussion that, again, I always look at, like, if you want to be somebody that is going to defend AEW's position, you have ammunition to support that argument. I think that if you are Tony Khan, if you are someone that is loyal to Tony Khan, you can make a lot of arguments about how Dynamite still performs. But I think if you take an objective look at what is the trajectory of this company, and do we want to take this product and roll the dice over the next 3 years that we also find ourselves in a position where cable is still declining and we are an asset to these cable networks with this product? Is this the team and is it the coach that we want to take for the next 3 seasons versus addressing things now where things are not, this is not a recession, but we are certainly not, this is not a prosperity period either for AEW. Like if this is WCW, this is I would say spring of '99. This is not spring of 2000.
Yeah, and again, to be clear, because I see that whenever you talk about AEW business too, the chat gets it bubbles. We're not talking I'm not talking about Tony not being the president of the company and not continuing to make media deals and continuing to lead the company as an executive.
No,
I'm talking specifically, narrowly about head of creative, that specifically, and not anything else.
Like if we're going to focus on the creative, like the tone, like there is not enough acknowledgement of how nearly impossible it would be for a television deal of this magnitude. Like, following as much MMA, the amount of attention and coverage that PFL gets, if PFL could do a fraction of what AEW has done, I mean, it's remarkable to me that this is a company that does, like, it just exists because it has gotten great funding and it was able to get on ESPN, but this thing does not barely register on pay-per-view. It is like it is nowhere. It could never draw to the level of an AEW on any recurring basis. And they have been able to garner like so much attention within the MMA media space. But an AEW, like there are a lot of success stories that you can lean on that Tony Khan has spearheaded. And this television deal, it's how many attempts has there been for a non-WWE product to get on television, much less one that has paid this degree. Like I think you do have to separate the creative direction of company with the results, and many are going to justify the results with what has preceded it, that this creative direction has caused this audience to tune in, that we have turned into real significant dollars that will turn this company profitable.
Yeah. And I think TNA is a lesson there too, in terms of you can have enough problems, bad enough creative, or hiring people that your network tells you not to hire back, can lead to your downfall in distribution from not being on the Spike network, which became Paramount, and being on Pop TV.
Wholly irrelevant.
Wholly irrelevant. Now you're on Access TV, which is a decent network, but it's in, I don't know, a third of the U.S. households in any case. And in terms of judging the content, at least in terms of critical success, and I understand, being a head booker, being booker of the year is something that's important to Tony. And if you look at something like Cagematch.net event ratings to see how the inmates are just critically receiving the major weekly programs, and now we've got a logjam here at about 6.8, which is where almost everybody is essentially tied now. We've got NXT actually in the lead. NXT, the most critically well-received TV show on Cagematch.net right now. Just behind it is Dynamite, and then just behind Dynamite, with only a tenth of a point behind, is now SmackDown. And there even was in Q2, Raw was rated above Dynamite, was the most well-received show in Q2 of this year. So, I mean, in terms of just thinking about, if his goal is just to have the critical acclaim of producing a great wrestling show, he's not in the lead there.
Yeah, and it harkens back to our discussion.
Who won Booker of the Year in the Observer Awards last year?
Wasn't it Paul Levesque?
It was not Tony Khan. I believe it was Paul Levesque, yeah.
Like, it goes back to our discussion again that a lot of the critical acclaim for WWE, it is coming from large personalities put in like very big star-driven segments. And in AEW, like, there is the idea, do we lean into more of the non-wrestling, or is that a trap that you are essentially just presenting a lesser version of WWE, which is a trap we have also seen companies fall into? Like, there is that certain, like, AEW can put together a tremendous lineup each week on its television. But I think it is more intangibles that the audience is seeking out. And that does go to, like, the engagement people have in this Jon Moxley Death Rider storyline that is the A storyline in the company. But there's been no indication of that being this galvanizing force that is bringing this company added attention, and that you're building to this big crescendo that the audience is on the ride for.